The 2024 United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP29, kicked off on Monday in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. The conference is being attended by delegates from about 200 countries, business leaders, climate scientists, indigenous peoples, journalists, and various other experts and stakeholders. The summit will go on until November 22nd. The primary goal of COP29 is to bring together countries to develop a shared plan for curbing further global warming. It would also focus on scaling up climate finance to help developing nations tackle the adverse effects of climate change. COP, or Conference of Parties, is held annually, during which members of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, an international agreement, signed in 1992, that has provided a basis for climate negotiations meet. Since 1995, delegates have been meeting regularly to discuss climate policy except 2020 when the conference could not be held because of COVID-19. This year the conference is also in the news because many fear the Trump victory could derail the climate agenda. But more on that a little later. First up, let's find out what the Convention on Climate Change has managed to achieve so far. The first major breakthrough occurred at COP3 in Kyoto in 1997 when the Kyoto Protocol was adopted. This agreement placed obligations on wealthy, industrialized countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by specified amounts. However, the Kyoto Protocol's effectiveness was limited, as many affluent and powerful nations were dissatisfied with its terms. For instance, the United States signed the protocol but never ratified it. The next significant development came with the adoption of the Paris Agreement at COP21 in Paris in 2015. This landmark agreement established a legally binding international treaty aimed at limiting global temperature increases to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and ideally below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Additionally, the parties agreed to submit their climate action plans, known as Nationally Determined Contributions, NDCs, by 2020. Another key milestone occurred during COP26 in Glasgow in 2021, with the adoption of the Glasgow Pact. In this agreement, the parties committed to phase down the use of coal. The biggest criticism of COP has been that it has failed to enable enough emission cuts to put the planet on a pathway to meet the 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius targets. Studies have shown that the world must cut its emissions by at least 43% by 2030 relative to 2019 levels to keep alive any hopes of achieving the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. However, by 2023, the world had not even begun the downward journey. Emissions are still rising, and have not yet peaked. In the best-case scenarios, global emissions are projected to be just 2% below 2019 levels in 2030 instead of 43% that is required. COP has also been unable to provide climate finance to developing nations. For instance, in 2009, the wealthiest countries, which are disproportionately responsible for the climate crisis, promised to raise every year from 2020 for developing nations to help them reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis. They failed to deliver on their promise. Climate finance is at the top of the list at the conference. Key stakeholders are negotiating the new Collective Quantified Goal, NCQG, a new amount that must be mobilized by developed countries every year from 2025 onward to finance climate action in developing countries. It has to be more than the $100 billion that developed countries, collectively, had promised to raise every year from 2020. However, talks over the NCQG in recent months have been deeply divided. Also, Trump's victory might make things difficult as far as climate funding is concerned. Trump's potential return to the US presidency has raised concerns about the future of climate action. As a well-known climate change skeptic, he has vowed to boost fossil fuel production and withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement, among other troubling commitments. Trump's stance on climate change has attracted attention, particularly following his remarks at the World Economic Forum in Davos a few years ago, where he criticized prophets of doom. He dismissed alarmists who, in his view, sought to control every aspect of our lives. However, he also supported a US-led initiative to plant 1 trillion trees. These contradictory statements have made his views on climate change seem inconsistent and unclear. While Trump has referred to climate change as mythical, non-existent, and an expensive hoax, he has also acknowledged it as a serious subject that is very important to me. Despite Trump's America First rhetoric, some argue that the US will need to continue supporting climate-related policies, which are gaining increasing global backing. The global transition to clean energy is picking up speed, and halting this progress would be detrimental to the US. Investment in clean energy is already surpassing that in fossil fuels and is projected to be nearly double the investment in coal, oil, and gas by 2024.